All right, in this video we're going to talk about how the Industrial Revolution started. All right, it starts in Great Britain. All right, it's going to start in Great Britain, and we want to talk about factors that contributed to that. All right, because for much of human history, people were farmers. That's what they did. That's what they knew. And now all of a sudden, there's a drastic shift. Once again, revolution is a drastic change in what people do for a living, how they survive. And no longer are they just going to be farming to survive, but now the type of jobs are going to change. How goods are made is going to change. Our society itself, where people live, there's going to be a ton of changes to take place. All right. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the enclosure movements. All right. The enclosure acts passed by Parliament are going to be important. All right. So to back this up, what this means is there were in Britain at the time, there were common lands. These were lands that anybody could use to farm, hunt, all right, lands that were communal lands by the community. The government owned them. Anybody could use them. All right, if you think of like just almost kind of like a park, people could just go. They could farm, they could hunt, they could do whatever on these lands. It didn't have to be. It wasn't necessarily privately owned. It was just owned by the government, and anybody could use them. Well, Parliament, what they started to do is, and this was very important. It was very important for small-time farmers because they didn't have enough land or property to be able to survive on their own. So this was really crucial for small-time farmers. But Parliament started to allow wealthy landowners to buy these common lands. And it's called enclosure because they would fence off, they would enclose the commons so people couldn't use them anymore. And that was really devastating for small-time farmers. And so, knowing that they couldn't survive, they also started selling their lots to these wealthy landowners as well. And the key here that I want you to get from this, the enclosure movement, is that this is going to provide a workforce for factories. Because people now, these farmers, that all they've ever known, their parents farmed, and their parents' parents farmed, and probably on that land, they probably got that land passed down to them generationally, and that's all they've ever known. But now all of a sudden it's taken away from them. So now they got to go and they got to find work. Well, it so happens, we'll talk about through a myriad of other reasons, but we'll talk about all of a sudden factories are going to start popping up, and that's going to be beneficial for these farmers because where the jobs are going to come from is these small-time factories. And so the Enclosure Acts basically caused farmers to no longer be able to farm, have to leave, and they have to go and work in factories. And then while this was going on, part of the reason why Parliament did this, the Enclosure Acts, is because there was this new technology that was coming out, and these wealthy landowners thought that they could make farming more effective with less people. Because there was all this remember, a drastic change in how we farm. A revolution means a drastic change. So it's a drastic change in how they farm. New transportation, new technology, new techniques, the seed drill, crop rotation, stronger horses were being bred. More people could be fed at a lower price with less labor. All right, so because of this agricultural revolution, farming now can become productive. It can become financially beneficial because you don't have to pay laborers. All right, you can get more people can have access to your food at a lower price, and you can still make money. All right, so these landowners are going to have, for the first time, really farming always was kind of for sustenance to survive, but now farming is being used with all these revolutionary ideas. There it is. There's the word. They are able to make money farming. All right, and they're going to use this extra income. They're going to become wealthy. They're going to invest it in manufacturing. And so they're going to invest it in factories, and that's also crucial because you need, what do you need in order to start a factory? You need money. All right, and so that's going to be important. That's going to be crucial. Laissez-faire economics, Enlightenment ideas that encourage the shift in economic policies. The government doesn't interfere. All right, this is going to be also a huge benefit because people now are going to be able to open up factories. Once again, it's not government controlled. I remember this is something we talked about last unit where the government's not going to get involved. People can produce what they want. When they want, they can charge whatever they want for it. So these business owners, these people that are willing to step out and say, well, we can find creative ways to increase profits. We can go and we can try to make this product. We can use the technology that's available. We can try to make it better. We can pay these people very little since the government's not going to get involved, and we're going to talk about the working conditions later. But we can take these risks because now the government is going to allow us to basically do what we want. And because they were making money available, they were encouraging businesses to open up. So this Enlightenment idea is going to also help spur. It's going to also help spur the Industrial Revolution. Britain also had an abundance of natural resources. Coal. That's going to be not important right away, because it's going to eventually be used as a fuel source. Like I said, not right away, but eventually will be. Iron ore is going to be crucial. Iron is going to be used. Eventually, steel will be created as a reliable metal. But waterways initially, this is how they're going to power early factories. These plethora of waterways that just cut through these rivers and canals. They cut through Britain, not only for transportation, but for power. As well. And so the abundance of natural resources in Great Britain at the time, between the coal, the iron, the waterways, I mean, you could continue on, but they had so many natural resources that also is going to play a large contributing factor. And then whatever resources they didn't have, the benefit there is that they had a huge colonial empire. They had a huge colonial empire. Let me shift the screen here a little bit. They were able to produce large quantities of goods. And then, because, Britain's a pretty tiny nation, eventually if you're selling goods to just Britain, maybe eventually you kind of saturate the market. Nobody wants to buy your goods anymore. But since they had territories in Canada, they had territories in South America, Africa, they had all of Australia, they had all of India to sell goods. They had portions of China's spheres of influence. I mean, there's all sorts of territory around the world where they could sell goods. But also, like I said, if they didn't have the resources, when they used the American colonies, they used them, for cotton, for other materials. They used the raw materials that they would take, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about imperialism. They would take raw materials, meaning goods that are not finished. They would take it from these areas. They'd make it in their factories, and then they'd ship it back and sell it to these places. So they're basically taking their goods, making it into something, and then they have to sell it. Then these places would buy it from them, and so that helped just their economy thrive. All right, so this vast colonial empire is going to have a huge impact. The fact that Britain, we'll talk about this with imperialism, but there's a saying that says the sun never sets on the British Empire, because it was so large that literally the sun would always be shining regardless of the time zone. You can see they have territory in like virtually every time zone there is. That the sun is always shining somewhere on it because it's so massive. They have so much control of so much territory. And so they're able to buy and sell goods there. And then also there's a increase in technology. Goods can now be produced more efficiently. Mass production of goods. We're going to talk about the different types. We'll talk about the spinning jenny. We will talk about the steam engine. We will talk about the loom that's created. We're going to talk a little bit about textiles, which is basically cloth making, and it's going to be like, why the heck are we talking about textiles? It's because those were the first factories that were introduced, because really what we want to focus on is factories. I don't want to focus so much on the textiles, but the factories that are being produced are first ones are textile mills, and that's going to put more pressure on farmers, because that's what farmers' wives used to do while they were farming during the day. The women would make the clothing as a way to supplement their income. It would be a very long process, but through the factory use, through factories now producing that clothing, those small town farmers, they'd lose that source of income as well, which would cause them to lose their land because they wouldn't be making that money there. All right, but this increase in technology and Adam Smith's idea of division of labor, where everybody does a specified part, it made goods being produced very efficiently, very effectively, and significantly cheaper, so more people could have access to these manufactured goods. All right. So these are really the 6 key things that are going to be why the Industrial Revolution all of a sudden started. The fact that these farmers no longer could farm on their land because of the enclosure movement. More people were being fed, the laissez-faire economics, where people could kind of do what they want. The natural resources allowed for this to take place. They could sell their goods beyond the borders of Britain, and this new technology made it all possible. Those are the contributing factors.